Chapter 7. The Princess and the Portrait. The prince was more pleased than ever the maestro was coming to do his portrait now that he'd made Princess Tulip Morningstar his fiancée. It would be an engagement portrait with the two most attractive members of royalty anyone had beheld. The princess went back to her father's kingdom after the ball and awaited the various ceremonies, parties, and other trappings that would take place during their engagement, all leading up to, of course, the most majestic of weddings. She would, by custom, live with her family, visiting the prince frequently with her nanny as chaperone, and sometimes also bringing her mother along as it suited her on the occasion presented itself. This visit she would come with her nanny. Everyone was excited that the prince had commissioned the maestro to paint the portrait. He was the most celebrated painter in many kingdoms and was in great demand. Not since the renowned master maker of mirrors had there been another artist who caused such a stir in the royal circles. Though this art could be brutally accurate, most century didn't seem to let that color their opinion of the man. Princess Tulip showed up on a rainy afternoon, quite soggy. Though her hair was flat and her clothes were sticking to her, she somehow managed to look pretty, quite worth rescuing from the elements. The prince kissed her sweetly on the cheek and greeted her happily when she stepped out of the carriage. "Tulip, my love, how was your journey?" A grumble came from inside the carriage, and out popped what must have been his dearest nanny. It was intolerable, as you could see. The carriage leaked, and I would be surprised if my darling girl doesn't come down with the nastiest of colds. I must get her into a hot bath at once. The prince blinked a couple of times and smiled at the woman. She was impossibly old and lined like a little apple doll that had been molding away on a windowsill. Her hair and skin were powdery white, and though much aged, her eyes were rather sparkling with life. This woman was a little firecracker. "I am so pleased to meet you at last, Nanny," he said as she wrinkled her nose at him, as if there were a foul smell about the air. Yes, very pleased to meet you, Prince, I'm sure. But won't you please show us to our rooms so I can get this girl into a hot bath?" Cogsworth took things into order. "If you will follow me, Princess, I will happily show you to your quarters, so you may freshen yourself after your long journey." And with that, he took the ladies up the stairs and out of sight. Well, the princess thought, this visit will be interesting, with Nanny grumbling about. Perhaps he could get Mrs. Potts to divert her in the kitchen so he could have some time alone with his princess. He couldn't imagine what the week would be like with her around. This dread was squashed with the announcement of his other guests, the maestro. He came promenading in with the daintiest of outfits, all velvet and lace in various shades of lilacs and blackberry. He had large, sad eyes set into a slightly swollen face, but seemed all the more handsome for it. The maestro looked as if he had a saucy story to share, and the prince wondered if it would be unwise to seat Nanny and the maestro at the same table that evening for dinner. His head spun at the thought of Nanny listening to the painter's outlandish stories. What he needed was Cogsworth. He would sort it all out. And sort it out he did. Nanny dined with Mrs. Potts, Cogsworth, and the other staff downstairs at Mrs. Potts's invitation. It wasn't custom by any means for a guest to eat with the downstairs staff, but Mrs. Potts had a way with people, and by the end of the conversation, the two were swapping stories about the prince and princess when they were young, determining which of them had been more insolent. Meanwhile, dinner upstairs was delightfully charming. The servants had decorated the dining room splendidly. Rather than a large floral centerpiece, there were a number of smaller arrangements, artfully placed on the table, evoking the feel of a garden infused with candlelight. There were many crystal bowls with floating flowers and candles, and the particular cut of crystal made an interesting use of the light, causing a fanciful effect of reflection on the walls and diners. It was quite beautiful, but not as beautiful as his darling love, the prince thought. The maestro broke the silence. To love in all its tantalizing and vexing forms. Tulip laughed behind her fan, while the maestro stood theatrically erect with his glass raised high in the air, waiting, it seemed, for someone to respond to his toast. The prince feared the maestro might stay there forever, frozen in time, like one of his paintings, if he didn't say something quickly. Yes, to love, he said, and quickly added, and to you, maestro. Princess Tulip giggled again, warming the prince's heart even more. He loved how sweet and demure she was, so content to sit idly, and always looking ravishing while doing so. He really couldn't have chosen a better maiden to be his bride. I couldn't be more pleased to have you, maestro. I know you will capture the moment perfectly. We will look back on our engagement, and not only with fond memories, but with, how is it you put it? Yes, our senses will instantly be assaulted with a profound and visceral recollection of that exact moment in time. The maestro looked pleased. I'm honored you remembered my words so vividly. He then turned his attentions to the young lady, hoping to bring about something of her personality. You must be brimming with utter excitement, princess, are you not? The princess's eyes widened with wonder. She hardly knew what to say. Oh, yes, I am. I am very much looking forward to the wedding. Of course you are. But I was, of course, speaking of our painting. I will want to see an assortment of outfits from each of you for my approval, and we will need to discuss the topic of location. The rose garden seems like an enchanting setting, I would think. Yes, the rose garden it shall be. I have decided, and there is no changing my mind, he continued. It seems every portrait that is painted with any real feeling is a portrait of the artist, and not of the sitter. I dare say you will both be magnificent. Tulip blinked more than a few times, trying to understand his meaning. Will you be in the portrait with us, maestro? She asked. Both gentlemen laughed. Princess Tulip Morningstar didn't know if they were laughing at what she had said because it was clever or dull-witted, but she decided to act as though it had been the cleverest thing she could possibly have said, and hoped the topic would change to something she needn't partake in. The maestro, seeing the dread in her face, added, Don't fret, dear Tulip. I am so clever that sometimes I don't understand a single word of what I am saying. To this, the princess could reply only by saying, Oh, and then giggling some more, which seemed to please everyone, because they joined in her laughter. The next morning, the magnificent trio was found in the rose garden as the maestro sketched, and the lovers did their best to hold their poses without giving the master painter cause to become cross with them. Prince, please, this is supposed to be the happiest moment of your life, and your face looks like you've been eating something sour. Why do you look so displeased? What could you possibly be thinking of that causes one's face to contort so? The prince had in fact been thinking about the last time he was in the rose garden, the night he parted with Circe. The events had become blurred in his mind, and he was trying hard to make sense of it all. Surely Circe had brought along her wicked sisters, and they had proclaimed he was cursed for his misdeeds. He was certain he hadn't imagined it, but the curse itself, that was balderdash, wasn't it? Sometimes he couldn't help fearing it might be true. The prince was brought out of his thoughts by Cogsworth's voice. Lunch is served. The maestro slammed down his drawing coals, cracking them into tiny powdery bits. Very well. I think I prefer to lunch in my room, alone, he huffed, and he stormed away, not uttering a single word of salutation. To either of the happy couple. Rather than giggling, as well known was Tulip's way, she wilted into a heap of tears at being scolded. The prince, it seemed, had his hands entirely full with the fitful maestro, his weeping Tulip, and her sour nanny. How would the rest of the week go?